All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is Jeff, and the hype is at just absolute maximum levels right now because we're talking fourth edition of Malifaux. And I thought it would be a good time to get Mr. Justin Gibb on to talk about the new edition and all kinds of exciting stuff. So, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Very excited.
Awesome. So, before we get into it, I want to kind of talk some of the broad ideas, some of the kind of high level ideas and what the process is like going from third to fourth edition from you guys' perspective. But before we get into that, can you just give me a little bit of background on yourself, I guess, your history with the company as well as what your role is at this point?
Yeah, I started with Wyrd in 2011, technically, part-time and then full-time in 2012. I was the lead in charge of Malifaux second edition, through most of that edition. I actually ended up not really working on the development of third. But then I came back around 2023, worked on the last book with third. And yeah, and then ended up heading up the design of fourth edition as well. So I only work on even numbered editions. So once we get to fifth,
You're
skip
out.
that one. I'll be back for sixth. Yeah.
So you did work. You said you worked on the last book. Did you have a hand in things like the gaining grounds and stuff like that, or was it mostly about design of the models?
Yeah, the most recent gaining grounds, the most recent keyword reworks. I was a team lead in charge of those. Obviously, there is a whole team of designers, right? Who like John and Chris and Jesse put in a lot of work on those, but I was, you know, doing the schedules and you're doing this part, you're doing this part. We'll test this day, that sort of stuff.
Right. Cool. So yeah, I mean, I kind of want like I want to get right into fourth edition, but before we would do that, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about third. I guess just from the little, from the one book that you worked on. Were there any? I guess what was the perception internally like about how the arc of third edition went? Like, because obviously quite a bit changed over the course of third edition. We started doing keyword reworks. The gaining grounds kept changing. What was the feeling internally about how that whole process went? From my perspective, it seems to me like the edition started out strong and got with a couple of very minor exceptions, just continued to kind of improve in terms of balance. The gaining grounds, I think most people thought they got kind of better and better as they went. So, what was the thinking internally about that stuff?
About the arc of third edition, I think it went pretty much like the arc of most miniature game editions, right? Because you start off with lots of excitement and lots of new things, but then people sort of figure out the meta, right? It's I don't want to say that it gets solved, but it trends more and more towards solved, where you're seeing the same lists and the same out of keyword models always taken and that sort of stuff. And also just naturally over the course of time, as you release more models, you're going to have some elements of power creep here and there. I mean, it a lot of players think that we do power creep intentionally just to sell models, but that's not really true. It's really more of a testing thing where we put a new model in the test and players are like, well, this isn't as good as other model in the faction, so I just don't take it. And we're like, okay, it needs to be a little better. And then, and so and they pick and choose the best models that were released over the course of the edition, and it gets sort of top heavy near the end, right? Like, and I think that happens to Warhammer, that happens to Infinity, and that's sort of just the arc of the life of a miniatures game edition. And I think anyone who's really involved in that space sort of knows that by now. And so I don't think there was anything exceptional about third edition in terms of like it wearing out its welcome that required fourth. It's just like, it's in its seventh year, technically. It's 2019 to 2025, so six and a half. It's about how long that they tend to last. But yeah, I think that overall, third edition was a great edition in Malifaux. Going back to second, which I was much more involved in. We saw the addition of keywords. Didn't exist in second. You just take whatever you wanted. That was fantastic. My personal favorite change, crunchy designer thing that nobody else notices, italic text
Mm-hmm.
being a cost or
Awesome.
something that
Yeah.
happens before the action. Yeah, gives us like a really good timing point that I think cleared a lot of things up. And yeah, it was a really great addition. And the evolution of like gaining grounds, those out about once a year to keep the edition fresh. Did it in second, plan to do it in fourth. So yeah.
Very cool. Were there any other sort of takeaways or I guess issues that you guys ran into in third edition aside from some of the things you just identified with power creep and things? Any problems that you ran into that you might have learned from in the previous edition, kind of going forward?
Yeah, I think third edition had some rough edges, that we're trying to smooth out with fourth, right? One big one is playtime. A casual player playing third edition can easily take 4 hours to play a game, 4 or 5
Or
hours
more?
to play a game. Yeah, and that is not ideal, right? Ideal for this sort of game time would be 2 hours, roughly. So that was a big thing that we were looking to try to ease with fourth edition. I think that cheaper models had an issue where models on the more expensive end of the range were just more the players liked them more, right? Because of a combination of pass tokens, and I think also the focused condition sticking around led to a situation where you could give your opponent pass tokens because you took a bunch of cheap models. Your opponent could kill them before they activated, but they still have the pass token. And then also the focus condition allowing players to basically just almost always cheat the damage flip, cheat into their highest card, auto kill those small models, and then have that activation advantage combined to make models under like 7 stones just very unappealing. So that was another issue with third that we're looking to fix with fourth.
Yeah, I think those are definitely good call outs. I remember having long conversations with people about focus and whether it should just go away entirely, which it seems like there was a conclusion about that, which we'll kind of get to in a bit here. Um, so, I mean, I guess all of those things are issues that you were looking to address coming into fourth edition. Um, and I guess another one was also just the accessibility for new players, right? It seems like that's a pretty big focus of a lot of the changes that were being made, which sort of ties into the game length time and the power creep and stuff like that. But were there any other big kind of concepts that you really wanted to implement that were important with switching to fourth?
I wanted to, I mean, anything else, I think we're getting into like crunchier details, which I'm happy to. But in terms of like top down design goals, it was lower playtime, make it more accessible to new players, and then sort of rebalance everything and sort of refresh the meta. Those were the three big goals. In terms of like new sort of exciting things we wanted to add, one big one that I wanted to add was a focus on terrain and using the terrain during the game, making it more dynamic, letting models, climb, charge across rooftops, fall, throw each other off rooftops, like that kind of thing. Because one big advantage that miniatures games have is they take place in a 3D environment, right? Which like a lot of board games don't. Um, and unfortunately, a lot of miniature games don't really utilize that space well.
Yeah.
Pieces move more like pieces on a chessboard with some blocking obstacles in the way. We wanted to make you like run across the rooftops of Malifaux and have like a running fight. Make that an option at least. So that was something we wanted to do with fourth. I also wanted to relook at schemes because the way that schemes have worked, I feel like, and I'll gladly go into it if you want. I feel like we've never totally gotten right, and I think we have with fourth. So, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. So previously schemes were pretty regimented and it changed a little bit from second to third edition, but the new sort of concept in fourth is this sort of choose your own adventure style thing where you're going to pick a scheme, you may or may not score it, and then you can switch to another scheme or a selection of schemes on the next turn, which is really interesting because it keeps the schemes changing. It actually makes them a lot less predictable for your opponent. Um, what was I guess where did that idea come from, and how do you think that fundamentally changes the play pattern in the game?
It came from actually just thinking about the problem and how to solve it. So the problem, I think, in second edition was you chose your scheme secretly, right? And then when you scored them, you revealed them and you got your points. But that led to situations where on turns 2 or 3, people locked up all their scheme points and they didn't need to worry about it for the rest of the game, right? Third saw that issue and went, okay, we're going to give each scheme two ways to score. One during the turn that you reveal, and then it'll give you another end of game goal at the end of that scheme, right? Which worked well to keep people engaged the whole game. But the problem was that number one, well, two problems really. Number one, it meant that once you started the game, you had 5 objectives to worry about. Effectively, 2 from each scheme, the on reveal and the end of the game, and then the strategy. So there's 5 objectives you sort of have to keep in your head, number one. And number two, scoring at the end of the game means that one of the easiest ways to score was to just kill all of your opponent's models and then score all your points. Like it's like that scene in Starship Troopers where it's like, can't I just push a button? And he's like, well, if you disable the enemy's hand, he can't push the button, right? So to bring the emphasis back on like the schemes themselves and not just killing your opponent's models, we wanted to make sure that people were constantly engaged with their schemes. And we also wanted to lessen the number of things you had to worry about right from the start of the game. So I thought, like, well, what if you just pick one scheme, and then at the end of the turn, you pick a new scheme, and then you pick a new scheme, right? So the way it works in fourth is you get a random pool of 3 schemes. You pick one secretly. When you accomplish it, you reveal it, you get points. Then at the end of the turn, you pick a new scheme, like you said, and that scheme that you picked the first time will have a list of 3 new schemes to choose from. You pick one of those and you keep going. And the list of 3 means that your opponent still has a reference point to know what you're doing. It's not just totally random, and also you can't just constantly min-max the easiest scheme for your crew. There's a limitation there. So that's good. But it also creates, in my opinion, a very narrative system where it's like, okay, we scouted the rooftops. Now we need to light the beacons to signal something. That signal was for the assassination of this enemy model. And you got this sort of narrative you can kind of tell that evolves with the game that I think is really fun. And I think it's one of the things, having tested Fourth for a while now, it's one of the aspects that I think is working the best. Like people are like, yes, these schemes are pretty good. We're going into open beta on the 21st, so obviously there's still room to improve. But like the kind of things we're talking about schemes at this point in time is, the nitty gritty of like, when should this one be scored? We're not rewriting it. So yeah, it's a system that I think is working really well.
Yeah, in the bit I've gotten a chance to play, I really enjoyed the kind of overall structure, and like you said, it does make it feel very narrative, which is very cool. Um, I think the point you made about having to know your 5 objectives at the beginning of the game, I think is definitely something that was very hard for players, especially new players, coming into third edition, because it can be a little bit overwhelming. You're trying to remember your abilities, your opponent's abilities, and also all of these objectives. So I would often play with fewer objectives. So I think that's definitely a really good point. And also the point about once you've scored your points, or once you know you're going to score your points, you can kind of ignore them. If you get your first 2 points on turn 2, turn 3 and 4, you're not worried about schemes anymore. It's only till turn 5 that you have to worry about it. So I do also like that aspect that you have to stay engaged throughout the entire game. Every turn, it's a new thing that you have to focus on. Is there any concern, or what do you think about the requirement of sort of overall game knowledge for players to really kind of understand sort of that flow of where the schemes go, the flow of where your opponent's schemes are going, and also the fact that you're constantly having to sort of reassess what you're doing in the game. Like the game state is going to fundamentally change if you score one scheme and now you have to pick a new one. You might have to completely sort of divert your forces off to do something else.
Yeah, I think that there's 2 different kinds of players we're talking about. There's newer players and experienced players. For experienced players, I think like after you play 3-4 games, you've read through the schemes, you know which ones work for your crew or for the crew you picked for that game, right? If you have multiples, which hopefully you do, go buy all the crews. Uh, more experienced players will get a really good feel of the flow, I think, pretty quickly. And I think that they will look at, like, let's say the 3 options their opponent had and be like, well, I know he didn't take that one. That would be way too hard for me as this one or that one. And there's some bluffing and some sort of guessing element that I think is really fun. So for experienced players, I'm not really worried at all. For newer players, I think it is sort of a concern of like, oh, I got to the end of the turn, I have to pick a new scheme and the game has changed and this is a big choice. But I think when a lot of people learn a new system, they're going to focus on what's in front of them. They're like, okay, this is my scheme. I'm going to try to accomplish it. Awesome. Okay, end of turn. I have these 3 choices. And it might take them 5 minutes, 10 minutes to decide which of the three is the best one for them. And then they'll go on from there. And while that, might be that pause happens there where you choose your new scheme, I think number one, it only happens with newer players who are sort of figuring out the whole system. Um, and number two, what we gain is when you have 5 objectives at once, instead of that pause happening once at the end of the turn, it happens constantly.
Yeah.
They
Every
go to move a
activation.
model and they're like, and they pick up, a scheme card and they're like, what does the scheme do? Like, and then wait, what about the other scheme card? And oh wait, what's the strategy? So like every single decision then needs to be reevaluated from the point of those 5 objectives. We've taken that burden and we've just sort of put it at the end of the turn. Like, look, worry about your one thing, and then at the end of the turn, choose a new one thing, right? And I think that overall, even though there is, a choice to be made, it will speed up the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Um, how does this new system do you think it will affect things like gaining grounds in the future? Is it are we going to expect kind of a similar thing? I know obviously this is a little bit beyond where we are at this point, but is it going to be a similar thing where we're going to get like a whole new pool of 13 and they're going to, or 12 I guess, and then they're going to kind of change directions in the map, or are they going to be more fundamental changes than that?
No, it'll work more or less how it did before. Um, yeah, you'll get a whole brand new set of schemes. Well, potentially brand new. Even classically in Gaining Grounds, we've brought back like favorites,
Sure.
right? So I'm not, don't hold me to that, but like we'll refresh the scheme pool, right, with new cards and strategies, same thing, and release them roughly once a year. The biggest change with Gaining Grounds is we are baking it into the system from the start. Both second and third had like core rulebook strategies and schemes. Those will not be in the rules at all. They're only in Gaining Grounds, and the rulebook even mentions we have this thing called Gaining Grounds. You'll need this pack of cards to play. Go get it. So we want to just train newer players to just interact with that system from day one. Because what we did see in both second and third is people would come in, they'd learn the game, they'd play the book schemes, and then they'd realize, oh, these are all out of date. They need to like get caught up, right? So we're just baking that right in.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I play a lot of other games, and Malifaux is unique in that most people who play Malifaux play it in a sort of tournament format, even at a casual level. Everybody just plays 50 Soulstone games with the Gaining Grounds that is currently active, whereas a lot of other games that have a similar sort of competitive, uh, season type thing, a lot of people will just play whatever's in the book because it's just very casual. But Malifaux is a little different. Everybody sort of just plays the newest, whatever's the latest and greatest.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's just sort of a almost a cultural thing, like a
Yeah,
community thing,
yeah,
right? I think some of it does evolve from the rules, right? Because the schemes and the strategies are sort of unique and fun to engage with, and that sort of thing. People want the newest one. But yeah, you're right.
yeah. It's a weird quirk of Malifaux when you're teaching new players. I bring that up a lot. So another thing, and this is kind of very important to me for what I do. You mentioned that accessibility for new players, kind of bringing new players into the system, is a big design goal here, and that's clear by a lot of the changes that are being made. What were some of the things that you thought were issues with accessibility that sort of held people back from becoming, kind of getting in at the ground level? And how are you kind of addressing those? What are the changes in fourth that are going to make that easier?
I think, and this touches on what we were talking about before. I think that most of the things that add to playtime also add to a resistance to getting new players into the game. Like, I think those two things go hand in hand. So, some of the things that we did to address both of those, I think the rework schemes are part of it, right? And I sort of explained why I think that's better for new players. Another major one was reducing text on cards. Um, by now, I think the community should have seen some fourth edition stat cards. If you look at them, there is less space on the card for text, right? Um, and I think that most of us have played a crew or a model where you look at it and there's like 4 or 5 actions it can take, and there's only 2 of them you would ever actually take, right? Now, if you're a new player, you go and you look at that model and you read every single one and you consider every single one when you activate, and then maybe you make a mistake and choose with the wrong one anyway, right? An older player will look at that card and go like, all right, I'm only taking one of these two, I'll activate the model, I'll go, right? So by cutting down on that text that frankly wasn't doing anything, even though it really wasn't affecting the game on a competitive level, it was absolutely affecting the game for newer players. And so we looked at the model and tried to get them down to like the essence of what the model is doing. Like, is this model a scheme runner? It should maybe have leap and something to drop a scheme marker and maybe a little attack, and then it's done, right? And that sort of thing. And I can kind of hear a lot of the more veteran players in the audience like screaming at me right now, like, "Oh no, you're taking away the complexity, you're taking away the depth." And I would say like most of the choices we were taking away were choices that players are not making anyway.
Hmm.
And a game can still be deep and strategic and very simple. Chess is a very simple game, right? And yet, I don't think anyone would argue it takes a lot of skill to play, right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of the philosophy that we're. I'm just putting that out there because it's not the direct answer to your question, but
That
to
was, you
try to keep
preempted
the
my follow up was going to be, how do you do that without
yeah.
reducing the depth of the game? So
Exactly.
perfect.
Yeah. So that's a big one is keeping those tactical choices really interesting
Yeah.
but simple. It's like, okay, this model has two choices. They're both really interesting. They're pulling in opposite directions. They're both valid. Which one do you do? As opposed to this model has five choices, only one of them is good,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, analysis paralysis I think is a huge issue for new players, and exactly
Yeah,
like you were just saying, when there's so much text on a card and a lot of it's not super useful, that is a big stumbling block because they're going to keep reading it and going, how do I use that? What am I supposed to do? And it's like, just ignore that part. Pretend it's not there.
exactly.
Yeah. And then I think another big thing, going along the same lines of like, just needing a ton of game knowledge to kind of efficiently play a game of Malifaux, the crew cards, or I don't know is that the official name for
Yes.
is it the crew cards? Okay. So the crew cards are interesting because number one, they're universal, so they're things that are going to kind of affect all of your models. So you kind of only have to remember them once. You don't have to check every card. But number two, it also dramatically reduces the number of potential statuses slash tokens slash conditions that you might have to worry about from your opponent, right? So if your opponent hands you their crew card, you can see, okay, here are the 3, 4, or 5 things I need to worry about. Um, it's a really interesting change. It's one of the things that I'm most excited about in this edition. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about how they work and what the thought was behind implementing them?
Sure. Yeah, so the crew cards are linked to a master, right? So since each master has two titles, each title gets their own crew card that's unique to them. Um, you hire your master, you get the crew card, and it's not an upgrade on the master, which is important because if the master dies, if it were an upgrade, it would go away, right? So it's in play for the whole game, affects the whole crew for the whole game. And the front usually has two-ish abilities and or actions it adds to every model in the crew. And the back is a reference for the tokens that the crew will put out. A big part of the reason for this is twofold. One is the complexity, which you just referenced, right? And the second is that it's a really fun way for a master to sort of define their crew. Because in third, you had keyword abilities, right? That every single model had to have on their card. Which led to an issue when you come out with a new title that maybe wants to do something different. What are you going to do with that? The crew cards let the two titles work very differently,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to just hiring one of two leaders. So the title system is definitely part of it. Um, Now, the back of the crew card is actually just as interesting because like a design principle we have is if a model in the keyword can give out a token, that token is written on the crew card. Even if only one model does it, it's still written on the crew card back, which limits the number of effects that the models in the crew can give out,
Right.
right? Now you can still take out of keyword models that are giving effects that aren't on the crew card. Like that's still valid. You can do that. Um, but generally, a lot of people play within keyword, or they take versatile models that have more basic tokens like shielded and stuff. Everyone's already
Right.
familiar with. Um, so that's sort of because we looked at a lot of the models in third, and you had things like, I don't know, Vent Steam as an example. It put an effect on the model for the rest of the turn, but it wasn't a condition, right? and you still had to remember it. And what was it? What is this thing? So we took all of those effects that changed the model status and we made them into tokens, and then said all the tokens have to be on the crew card. And so then we went and just sort of converted crews from third to fourth, and we're like, oh, there's like 20 things here. That's a lot. No
Yeah,
wonder this game is taking 4 hours. Let's cut it down to like 5 or 6.
right.
Which again, old players are screaming at me. Oh my god, you took out all my complexity. I get it. I hear you. But we tried to keep as many of those as we could, number one. And number two, having only 5 or 6 means that instead of just taking stuff off a model, we just repeated it in the crew. So like two different models would use the same token in different ways. So an example would be boring conversation gives out an unsettling token, which means that models within an aura need to take a test to do actions, right? And so you use boring conversation, you gain an unsettling token, models around you take tests to do stuff, right? Just like they did before. But now it's a token. Now I can write a model that has a trigger on an attack that gives the opponent that same token. And now it's sitting in the middle of their crew, making all of their models take tests to do stuff. So it works in a very different way than it did in third, um, by using the same token twice in two totally different places. It also forces us to really synergize those, because you have a crew that's giving out the same 4 or 5 tokens, then it's like, okay, I'll put this trigger on a model that can remove that token to do X. And I know it's going to work because there's plenty of things in the keyword that give out the token. There's not just like one guy that does sometimes,
Right.
right? So it allows that sort of synergy to be built in.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Again, in the kind of handful of games that I've already played, it makes the crew feel even more thematic. It's definitely something that third edition really leaned into with the keyword system, but in this, it makes the crew feel even more thematic because you have more of those synergies and like common abilities between them. In third edition, there were definitely crews that like one model would give out burning, and it was like, why is this here? It's just like this one model can do it, but it's not really good at it, and it's never going to affect the game state. Now you have a bunch of abilities that are all going to kind of interact with the same tokens, and it definitely feels a little bit more cohesive, like they're all in the family doing stuff together. So I like that. And then also again the fact that we're limiting the potential game knowledge that's required for a new player to walk into that match. They can just look at those 5 things and say, okay, I kind of can wrap my head around this.
And every crew box will come with 2 copies of the crew card. And the rules, it says to hand yours to your opponent. So you have yours in front of you, you have your opponent's in front of you, and
Yeah.
oh, he just put an aura concealing marker on my token on my guy. I know what that does. It's right here in front of me.
Yeah. So introducing new players, I think, is an important part of the game. It's something that I care a lot about. I do a lot of my content kind of focuses around that stuff. But let's talk a little bit more about existing players. So whether somebody that just recently got into third edition and maybe started playing in the last year or so, which I actually a lot of my locals are that's the case, or somebody who's a vet who's been playing all through third edition, what is the transition going to be like for them to go from third to fourth? Obviously, there's some kind of fundamental changes to the rules. We're going to need things like cards to update the cards because obviously they're all different. But what is that process going to be like for them?
Yeah, we will be releasing faction packs of stat cards, so you can play, I don't know, Neverborn. You can pick up the Neverborn one, and it will come with all of the stat cards for the Neverborn models, all the upgrades, all of the crew cards, and just your cards are up to date. And honestly, at that point, you're ready to go, right? You need to get a faction pack for your existing factions, and you need to learn the rules, and you hit the ground running.
How much of a transition do you think, or how much learning do you think somebody who's really solid on the third edition rules is going to need to become comfortable with fourth edition? Because obviously a lot of it, card flipping is still the same. A lot of it's still similar, but there are some, damage is very different. There's a handful of things that are quite different.
Not much. I think it's more unlearning, right? It's still, I think that there are some habits that you'll have to kind of be like, oh, that's different now. But if you can play Malifaux third edition, fourth should be a breeze because 90% of it's still the same. It's really just a question of remembering those little things that changed that are like, for example, you can now cheat negative flips, right? Um, and
Huge.
that's something that even when I play, it's like, oh, it's a negative. I can't cheat it. Oh wait, yes, I can. You know, um, I'm drawing cards at the start of the turn. I drew 6. Oh wait, it's 7 now. It's if anything, the smaller the difference, the harder it is in my experience. Whereas like you've already alluded, we remove damage flips, right? Like I'd never forget that because I look at the action. I'm like, oh, there's damage 3. There's no 2, 3, 4,
Right.
obviously. So yeah, it's those little things you get used to them with time. A game or two, they tend to go away.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed that quite a few of the changes sort of bring the rules a little bit more in line with the rules of the other side. And I don't know if that's my bias because I like the other side a lot, but was that something that you guys were sort of thinking about or aware of when you were making some of these changes?
Not really. Like in a way, yes. In a way, no. Because I, it's weird. That's an odd question because I'm trying to remember conversations I had like a decade ago
Yeah.
at this point. Because I wanted to remove the damage flip in second edition. Um, and I was like, we could just do, and it's the system we have now. Like, because my argument for removing damage flip is like, look, it's a place where new players always stumble.
Mhm.
Like explaining cheating
It's the
and
place.
modifiers, it
It's
is
the hardest
the
thing to
place.
understand. Yeah.
Always, always. I've had people walk away from demos at that point because it's the cheating and the stats and the wounds and moving, all that's great. And then you're like, okay, if I beat you by 6, that means I get a straight flip, but you beat me only by 4, so you get a negative flip, so you flip 2 cards, and that means you can't cheat. But if you got it up to a straight flip, then you could cheat. Now you reference your damage stat, it's 2, 3, 4, and it's just their eyes glaze over and you lose, right?
Right.
That's number one. And number two, Malifaux as a system has one of the longest just core resolution loops in miniature gaming, period. Right? Warhammer, I roll a die. It's a number. Maybe you make an armor save. Maybe you don't. That's it. And Malifaux, it's like I flip a card, you flip a card. I cheat a card, you cheat a card. Now I need to calculate
Declare
my damage flip. Now I
triggers.
need to
Yeah.
make my damage flip and declare triggers. And so anything we can cut out of that is going to vastly reduce the game time. And so for those reasons, in second edition, I kind of wanted to get rid of the damage flip, and it didn't go over well. Obviously, it didn't happen, right? But you were already big enough changes going from first to second. But the system I proposed was like, look, I want to beat you by 5 to get to my straight flip. Most damage tracks are like 2, 3, 4. They go up by about 1 every time. How about if I beat you by 5, I do +1 damage, right? Um, and I think I had that conversation with Aaron at some point, and he designed the other side. So I wouldn't be surprised if it came from that, but I also don't remember if like you know what I mean. Like, did I talk to Aaron about that or not? like, so anyway, it is something that I think evolved naturally from the way the damage flip already worked,
Mhm.
and it made them. It's convergent evolution, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm also thinking about like conditions that cancel each other out, focused and distracted, which was something obviously in third edition, but we've kind of seen quite a bit more of that now. And then also signature actions are very similar to morale actions in the other side, in the sense that it's a thing that some models can do. Well, I guess in the other side, it's only some models that can do it, but it's an extra action, but you can do it as your normal action as well. So just a couple of things there I noticed that were a little bit more in line with the.
yeah, and that one was the signature actions was Chris's idea, and I like it. It wasn't. I
I
don't
love
remember. Yeah.
I love that change.
So yeah, we'd have to ask him if he was looking at the other side. So it's one of those like it's another game by the same people that uses cards instead of dice. So it's like yeah, it's going to be you read 2 books by the same author and they're using the
Yeah,
same metaphor twice, right? It's like yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, definitely. Um, so one of the big issues that has come up, just kind of in the community, over the course of probably the last like 2 or 3 years, is this issue of bloat in the game as it kind of grows. And it's this kind of tension where the game needs to keep coming out with new things because you guys need to keep your jobs and you guys need to keep money coming into the company. You need to sell more models. But at the same time, the more stuff that gets added to the game, I guess the bloat issue is really two issues. One is it increases the complexity without necessarily increasing the depth of the game, right? Because there's more stuff. And two is that it potentially creates extra stuff that's not even useful because, like you said before, with power creep, it kind of one thing just outright replaces another thing in some cases. What's the thinking from the design team of on bloat, and what are some of the ways that you think that can be addressed, kind of in the bigger picture? But and then also like how is fourth edition in particular addressing it?
Yeah, I mean that's a big concern for any game that can't cycle out its older stuff, right? Like it's sort of the classic miniature game problem because Magic the Gathering is like, all right, this old set can't use it anymore. Oh well, right? Whereas miniatures games, it's like you built it, you painted it, you put in time, and then you tell people you can't use that anymore. That doesn't go over well.
Right.
So you find yourself in this situation with bloat, like you say. Fourth edition is addressing it in a few ways. Number one is we are getting rid of the concept of dual faction masters, right? Because I mean, part of that, a large part of that, was actually story beats, right? Theme of fourth edition is a line in the sand, people choosing where they fall and where they don't. So I don't want to get too into that. That's very much like Kyle's territory, but like a big push there with story. But also in terms of bloat, if you have dual faction, you have a master who's taking up space, or a keyword that's taking up space in two different factions, right? And by getting rid of that, like you essentially open up like 8 new slots for keywords, right?
Right.
So that's one way. Um, Another way is focusing more on the keyword system and leaning in more to that, right? Like you saw second to third do that, and that was in part an issue of bloat. You can't let people just take whatever they want. There's too many options. There's too many like little cherries to pick. Cherry pick the best list. So we've got to tone it down. So with fourth, you're seeing us be even more restrictive with that, where you can only take 3 out of keyword models in a list, which means that adding more keywords doesn't necessarily like invalidate the previous ones because you're not cherry picking from those as much. And so just going forward, just adding like, new keywords and making sure they do different. And we had a whole huge meeting where we came up, we looked at every single keyword, have a spreadsheet of like sort of its basic play style, strengths and weaknesses, and making sure that they're each taking up a different space in the factions and planning out like where we could do new ones. Where is there space to do that, especially now that we've re-looked at the dual keyword models. And we've already posted list by now that this airs of models that are leaving the range. But if you looked at it, there's only like 30 models on it out of a total of I think 750. That's a very small percentage. So that wasn't really done to reduce bloat. Like every model on that list, I could point to a very specific reason why it's gone. Like this one, the sculpt got broken. This one was packed in a weird way, giving the warehouse a headache. So like that's not so much at play, but it factors a little bit, right?
Yeah, there also seemed to be an element of that of like redundancy in certain keywords where it was like this model
Mm-hmm.
kind of was in the same place as another model, so we don't need it. There's no reason for it.
Yeah.
So do you think about bloat again? Malifaux is kind of a unique game in the sense that you can almost think of, especially since third, you can almost think of the masters like a faction in and of themselves because of the way that the hiring works. When you think about bloat, do you think that more models in a specific keyword is more of a problem for bloat, or do you think that more keywords in the game overall is more of a problem? Because that's another question that comes up a lot with like, should you make the game broader, give it more keywords, add more masters, or should you add more models to an existing keyword? And I think they're different problems slightly.
They're totally different problems. They are both problems, right? Too many models in a keyword means that some of those models won't be taken, right? Too many keywords in a faction means some of those keywords won't be taken. So it's sort of the same problem at different scales. Um, and so we looked at both of those, right? And the cutting the dual faction masters helped to reduce the number of keywords in factions. Cutting some of the individual models helped with the keyword stuff. What helped more with that is where if we placed models, if it was dual keyword and lost it, that helped a lot. And also just looking at where things fell, right? It's effectively like the same problem on two different scales.
Mm-hmm. So another thing that kind of ties into that a little bit here is we also got a pretty significant change here in how totems are going to work. So not only are we going to have a different totem for each version of the master, and in some cases that's a model pulled out of the actual keyword, but also the totems are way more important now. So talk to me about the sort of thinking behind making those changes to totems and giving them a real health pool and like significant abilities and all that.
Yeah, so like you said, so both titles are going to have a totem, which helps to distinguish them and how they play. And yeah, we're increasing the importance of totems because I think they've been in a weird spot for a long time. In second edition, you had to pay for them, so a lot of people just left them behind. In third edition, um, they were free, which is good, but then a lot of them weren't that effective, and you know, some of them were right, Lord Chompy, but this is a big deal. But we felt that if these are going to be sort of representatives of the master's power that you get for free, you're taking every single game, like they need to have an effect on the game, like a bigger effect than what they were having. Also, we felt that like because they're free, they're sort of all in the same slot. So they need some sort of balance between their power. So it's like if you have a totem that's, for example, Sly is becoming Perdita 2's totem, right? He's a full-fledged character, whereas let's say the Scales of Justice are a little, a little guy, right? And it's like if you design them just based sort of like on how they look, you might make Sly way better because he was a full-fledged character, and then Perdita 2 just has a better totem than Lady Justice 1. Like why? So they needed some parity between them in terms of balance. So we upped the power levels of all of them to make them more interesting on the table, to make them more balanced between each other, and gave them to every version of every master to just make them more interesting and differentiate them.
Yeah, so now, I mean, having them be free and also be much more impactful on the game, do you think that kind of overall affects the way that the dynamics of the game play out? Because you kind of have more stuff for the same number of points than you used to.
For sure. I mean, you would have a totem either way. You just have more effective stuff, right? So, but it definitely affects the game. You can use your totems to score and interact now. They're not all insignificant, and that absolutely affects like the balance of the game. But theoretically, like if everybody is getting roughly the same sort of upgrade in terms of balance, then it's equal.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So one of my last questions here that I've always been curious about, and I've talked to a couple of the other folks at the company about this before. Um, how much do you guys look at and sort of consider the opinions of the kind of community that plays the game? I mean, obviously you must be aware of that stuff and kind of pay attention if everybody hates something or something like that. But how much does that actually play into the decisions that you're making when you're designing a whole new edition? A lot of these are ideas that I think you have very good reasons for, and in my experience with the game so far, I think they work very well. But they aren't necessarily I think the things that everyone would have asked for. And then there's also some things that are like these are things that people have been chomping at the bit for and is now being implemented in the game. So how do you kind of decide between those things?
Oh, I consider the opinions of the community quite a bit. Um, you have been in the playtest, so like you've seen me back there, right? Responding to everything. Everybody sort of has a different style. Um, it is totally valid to take more of a hands-off approach, right? Um, but in terms of like the larger top-down goals, like for example, reducing the playtime. Some people have been asking for that for quite a while, right? Like there are absolute people like this game. I love it, but I can't spend 4 hours doing it, or I would love to spend 4 hours doing it, but my friends don't. But then there are other people who are like, no, I want to play a 4 hour game, or I am really experienced with this game, so I can play it in 2 hours, right? Um, so the community itself is not monolithic, right? So there's elements that agree and disagree with some of the things we're doing. So I don't know if you would consider playtime one of the things people are chomping the bit for, right? Um,
Well, that's why I think it's an interesting question, because obviously the whole community isn't going to agree, and there's also the danger that you're going to have like the vocal minority that's screaming about this one particular thing. You react to it, but actually everybody else didn't want that or something
right.
along those lines.
Yeah. No, that's a it's a really tough thing to consider. It's one of those. I think if I were to like rate my abilities as a game designer, right, like that Chris is really good at wording, right? Jessie, all of her stuff is really thematic and cool. She likes the bio a lot. John is really good at doing like very like the balance tweaks and writing really balanced crews. I am really good at like picking who to listen to, like on the forums and the feedback and the like parsing all of the battle reports and parsing the uh, their suggestions. One thing I found is that players and maybe people in general are very good at pointing out problems and not so good at pointing out solutions.
Yeah.
And sometimes, often, they will jump right to the solutions. So they'll start saying things like, you should do X, you should do Y. And, I look at X and Y, I'm like, those are both bad ideas, but what problem are they trying to fix? And I boil it down, I'm like, well, they're 100% right. That is a problem. And then take it to the team and try to fix it. So I think almost all of the problems with the game are driven by the community, right? It's like, okay, either whether it's something that's publicly stated, like, oh, this game takes too long, or things that were privately brought up in the playtest, right? Not all of the solutions are the ones that they suggested, but I think anything that we try to address was 100% brought up by one of the players.
Yeah, that's interesting. We're good at raising problems, but not solutions. I think that's why it's so important to have somebody like you who can kind of bridge that gap and translate the problem into the solution with the team. So that's fascinating. I know a lot of people like to gripe about things, or complain, or want say that their thing isn't powerful enough, or that there's some mechanic that is an issue. And it's always hard to get a sense of if you all see that stuff, and how much that kind of affects what you're doing. But it's good to know that you guys are kind of keeping an eye on that, because obviously the community has to be behind all the things that you're doing, so it makes sense that you would at least consider the people
Yeah.
that are on. Awesome. Well, there's like 1,000 other things that we could talk about. I would love to kind of get into all the rest of the changes here, but I know you're going to be probably sitting down. I don't know if it's going to go up right before this or right after this, but I know you're going to be sitting down with the Danger Planet to go in some more like the kind of nitty gritty of the rules. So everybody should definitely keep an eye out for that, especially if you want to know a little bit more in depth on some of the major changes to the rules. Aside from that, where should people keep up with you and M4 and all the changes and all the exciting stuff?
Oh, it'll all be on the Wyrd website. By the time this video goes up, we should have a specific, /M4E section of the website where all of the news posts are being congregated. So check them out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I know you're also a lore guy. You've written some stories, so I'm hoping to have you back on sometime in the near future to talk specifically about the lore, but I don't think anybody would want to listen to that right now, because there's too much exciting
right
stuff with 4th edition.
Yeah, I would love to. Want to talk about, Taylor.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I want to say a huge thank you to the extremely cool kids here on Patreon, the Steambound Scoundrels, Dogmatized, Devin, Spanner Rider, Robbie Ounce, Dynat, and Tom Likely.